So while, do you want to give it a couple more minutes or do you want to get started?
Just 2 more minutes, please.
Okay.
I believe, yeah, people that will come. Niveen, good evening.
Good evening.
Nice to have you here. Ramadan Mubarak. Kul aam wa khair.
Same to you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So Niveen, Scott was asking what a popular movie that you think he might know, or a series.
A movie?
A movie, yeah.
I think How the Stars Fell into the Sky.
I don't know that one.
I don't know that one too.
I think so.
But I
something
can
to do with stars. I don't know. I might have the name wrong, but it's something about stars and like a cancer patient or something.
I think you mean
The Fault in Our Stars.
The Fall of Our Stars. Yes, The Fall of Our Stars. Yes.
Oh, he does know it. Look at that. Very impressive.
The Lion King.
The Lion King. So, Sizab, what's that movie? The Great
Gatsby.
The Great Gatsby.
Yeah, The Great Gatsby.
It's based on
Leonardo DiCaprio. It's amazing.
Have you read the book, Wael? No?
No. Okay. So I think we should put it on our list, right? For the reading club.
Absolutely. Yes, we should put it on our list for the book club.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Hatim. Quran Khair, Ramadan Mubarak.
Khair. Thank you very much. Same to you all.
Okay, I think we can start now. Anne?
Okay. If you would like. Sure, I'll go ahead and start, and then people will probably filter in as they finish their iftars and time with their family. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Some of you have probably seen me before via video. I'm Anne Mangold. I'm the Deputy Cultural Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh. And I work with Wael El-Alawi, who most of you know, on many of our cultural programs. And we are very happy to welcome you here this evening. Ramadan Kareem to all of you. Thank you for choosing to spend some time this evening with us. We know this is an important time for you and your families and your friends. So we really appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time this evening. So we hope you will enjoy this first session in our new virtual Diwania series, where we aim to connect some of you to some of our folks in the American community here in Riyadh, who will speak about things ranging from creative writing, which you'll get some insight on tonight, to health and wellness, cooking, the environment, and much more. And if you have any topics that you would like to be addressed, please let us know, send us an email, send us a WhatsApp. I know you all have Wael's information, so we would love to hear from you and get your feedback. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Wael, who will introduce our speaker this evening, Scott Beggs. And again, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Anne. Appreciate it so much. And thank you very much, our guests, for being with us tonight. Ramadan Mubarak, and always great having you with us. Our tonight's speaker, Scott Beggs, is a professional writer with work at Vanity Fair, Mental Floss, and other major outlets. His fiction has appeared in an array of different magazines and podcasts, including, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, PseudoPod, Dark Moon Digest, Myth, and more. He is also a first reader for the Hugo Award-nominated publication Strange Horizons, currently living in Riyadh with his wife and his little princess. He will be leaving end of the month. So this is our only chance to see him. Thank you very much, Scott, for being with us tonight and appreciating that you are saving some time and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. The stage is yours, Scott.
شكرا وائل. أهلا وسهلا رمضان مبارك أصدقائي. Thank you so much. شكرا مرة. أنا مبسوط. It's my honor to speak with all of you tonight, and thank you for taking some time out to take this class. We will be talking about creative writing, and in particular, we're going to be talking about something called the hero's journey. And while my plan initially, before jumping right in to talk over my bio, was to have you list in the chat some movies, some popular movies or series that you're very familiar with, so that we can use them as some examples as we look at the hero's journey. I wish I could use some Saudi films as the examples. I've only seen Baraka Meets Barak and some horror films and some comedies, and I wanted to make sure that we had some examples that are the broadest popular possible, so that as many people within the class have a good reference for them or have access to them whenever the class is over. So thank you again, Wael, for that introduction. I have been a professional writer for 14 years. I spent the first 10 years of that as a professional film critic, mostly writing about movies, but sometimes talking about television. And my fiction has appeared in a variety of different outlets as well. So I like to approach creative writing from both sides, both as the critic and as a creator, and to think about it in those terms. And this evening, we're going to be talking about the hero's journey. And I think that we'll probably be using Avengers and Friends as primary examples. Omar just said Avatar, which is another great example. It fits perfectly within the structure of this. So we'll use a couple examples so that hopefully as many people as possible kind of pick up on something familiar to them within those stories, and hopefully those stories are familiar. The hero's journey is a storytelling structure. It is thousands and thousands of years old. It is ubiquitous in Western storytelling and very popular in storytelling traditions throughout the rest of the world. Basically, if you wrote a story using the hero's journey as your plot structure, someone in the United States, throughout the West, and pretty much throughout most of the world would recognize it or would feel familiar to them, even if they didn't know what the hero's journey was. It is something that so many stories utilize that it is very familiar to us. And it is so familiar that stories that do not utilize it often feel a bit strange or can feel not quite right. So the hero's journey has multitude of different parts, and different people will say that it has 17 parts or 28 parts or 40 parts. But I think the most basic version of it that I want to talk about tonight with all of you is 10 parts. And we will go along, break them down in order to get a better understanding of what the hero's journey is. At a baseline, the hero's journey is about taking a character or characters from point A to point B. It is about change. And that is the essence of many stories, change. How does a person change? How does a community change? How does an environment change? A business? How do a group of animals change? No matter what the subject of the story, in most stories, we're looking for something that sparks a change and characters or an environment that will go through with that change. And so you can think of the hero's journey as a cycle or as chapters that have bookend. The first section that we're going to talk about, the first part of the hero's journey, is called the normal world. Now, in the example of Friends, the normal world would be a group of friends hanging out in New York, and they all know each other well, and they all have their different problems, and they are trying to make the best of their lives. In a story like The Avengers, if we're looking at any kind of superhero origin story, you might have someone like Tony Stark, who is a billionaire philanthropist who makes weapons for a living. And is incredibly wealthy, and by the end of the first Iron Man movie, he has changed greatly. Mulan, Harama is suggesting Mulan. This is a great example. In the story of Mulan, the normal world that we see at the beginning of the story would be one in which Mulan's family wants her to marry, to make a match, to fulfill a very traditional understanding of what her role as the first daughter is in this family, to bring honor to her family. And so in different examples, as we go throughout this, if you're not familiar with the stories we're using, you can substitute for your own, something you're very familiar with. Try and think of these portions in a movie or a book or a television series that you're very familiar with. You will be able to find some examples of all of these as well. So the normal world, it's normal. It's what we're introduced to at the beginning. This is how things are. And typically how things are not necessarily perfect. They might be comfortable, they might be good even. And then we'll have a change. And that brings us to the second part of the hero's journey. That second part is the call to action. And this is where there is an invitation to change the normal world that the hero or the heroes are operating in. So in something like Mulan, this call to adventure is war. It is the incoming battle that is going to happen because an invading force is on the way, and because the emperor has demanded that every family provide a warrior for them to fight this war. Mulan is the type of character who is very prepared to meet this. She is eager to meet this, and she wants to go and fight this battle because her father cannot. For different stories, something like Friends, breaking it down into television is a little bit more difficult because there are multiple stories happening all the time throughout a series of episodes or throughout a full season. But for Friends, we can look at something like Ross and Rachel's relationship. In the beginning, the normal world is that they're friends, and the call to action would be the spark or tension, the romantic tension between the two of them, which is an invitation to one or both of them to change the nature of their relationship. For the Avengers, for any superhero movie, you might have something like in Iron Man, Tony Stark is injured while he is traveling in Afghanistan, and he is placed inside a cave where he builds the first Iron Man suit. So that invitation to action, or an invitation, a call to action, or a call to adventure, is meant to be an invitation for the hero that is in the normal world to step out of that normal world. And that brings us to the third element of the hero's journey, which is either a refusal of that call or an acceptance of that call. And you will see this in just about every movie, in just about every book. In Mulan, for example, Mulan does not refuse the call. In fact, she is very eager to answer that call and sneaks out in the middle of the night against her parents' wishes in order to answer the call to adventure. She decides to use deception to pretend to be a man in order to go and fulfill her family's quota for a warrior for this war. And in doing so, she has very enthusiastically answered the call to leave her normal life behind and go do something different, to go on an adventure. For the Avengers, it might be that Tony initially refuses. He doesn't accept that something drastic and tragic has happened to him. And throughout his time in the cave, as he is building this first Iron Man suit, and really before then, when he is accepting that he is just a prisoner, and a prisoner to a group that's using his very own weapons against him. As he's figuring this out, he has to go through a psychological change in order to accept his position, which is to recognize that his wealth does not help him where he is at, and his position does not help him where he is at, and that he is violently been thrown into a new paradigm, a new world. So there are definite examples in which a call to action is refused or accepted. And it's just a difference in between maybe the character's personality. Is it someone who is anxious and ready for that adventure? Is it someone who is living in a small town and is desperate to get out of the town? And any invitation, any chance to get out of that town is something that they are going to jump at? Is it a character who is competent but maybe overwhelmed by the size and scope of the invitation to adventure? Someone like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars initially says he's not going to go and travel across the stars with Obi-Wan Kenobi. All the information coming to him is overwhelming. And even though he is a small town boy who wants to get out of where he is at, the adventure that he was looking for is a little bit smaller than the one that comes to him. And so maybe because of danger, maybe because he doesn't want to stray too far from home, for many different reasons, initially, Luke says, no, I don't want to go on this adventure. And of course, something happens tragically that forces his hand and makes him need to go on the adventure. And that is often what happens when you refuse. The universe says, you cannot refuse this adventure, you need to go. So that brings us to the fourth portion of the hero's journey, that is the mentor figure and training. And so the mentor figure, to stick with Star Wars just briefly, with Luke Skywalker, a mentor figure would be like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who says, there is this fighting style that I know about, that I am a master of, and I would like to teach it to you because it's going to be helpful to you, in fact, necessary, if you're going to survive and be victorious on this adventure with this huge task that you've been prepared for. And so something like Mulan, she gets to the training camp and she has a host of different mentor figures, several who are showing her what it's like to be a man among men, and her commanding officer, who is someone who strives to push her to be stronger, to be faster, to be more agile, to be better with weapons, and of course to climb up the pole in one go. So there are different tasks set in front of the hero as they're becoming heroic, and they typically have a mentor figure of some kind who can be there for them in order to teach them along the way, to guide them, because without the guide, they're in trouble, or they will have to learn as they go, which can be its own kind of set of dangerous circumstances. So the fifth element of the hero's journey that comes alongside the mentor, comes alongside training, it may come after that, is tests, is the main character being tested. I want to stick with Mulan here for an example, because Mulan spends a lot of time within the movie at training camp, at her boot camp, effectively. It's a bulk of the movie. And part of it is because that is where she is going to transform from someone who is not a warrior to someone who is a fairly competent warrior. And it's an example of, okay, exercise, not being able to do a push-up, and then a month later being able to do 50 or 100 push-ups. Not being able to use a sword, and then a month later being able to use a sword quite decently. And so it's about tests and training that challenge the hero or the would-be hero to become something different than what they are. It's a leveling up. It's an increase in their ability. And alongside that, for Mulan as an example, you may be tested in ways outside of the boot camp. So they have a skirmish initially, and she's tested both as a warrior and for her ethical component, for whether or not she will help those who are stranded and figure out how to save her entire group by potentially revealing her secret and ruining her own career. So there are tests there, there's choices. I think choices is another great example of it. We have a hero who has a baseline personality, they have their own values, they have their own skills, and as they are changed by this mentor figure, as they learn more about the world that they're going into, you know, one that's in the case of Luke Skywalker in Star Wars is not just about farming in the desert, but is about a vast government and a rebellious force and fast spaceships and lightsabers and this interesting fighting style. All of these elements are new to the character, and they have so much to learn. And in doing so, while learning, they are being tested on that knowledge. They grow in the knowledge, they're tested in it, and then the test itself can also create more knowledge. And those tests can also be choices. They're faced and confronted with a choice. And it's usually a choice about being selfless or being selfish. It may be a choice that asks them to decide something that they would not have normally decided before when they were in the old normal world. And so you'll see examples of that throughout, for example, the Avengers, wherein they're being tested by different enemies and deciding whether or not they are capable of defeating those enemies, or recognizing that even if they beat a particular enemy, the threat of an even larger enemy is out there and suggests to them that they are not strong enough yet for that particular enemy. So those are some good examples of that. I think tests and choices really go hand in hand, and this doesn't have to be chronological. I think the mentor figure, the training, tests, choices, those can come together in a lot of ways, or be tangled up together. They can come all at the same time. So I think we're on the sixth thing. The sixth element of the hero's journey is an early victory or an early defeat. This usually comes at the midway point of the story. And you'll notice that we've gone from the 5th out of 10 things to the 6th out of 10 things. And typically this is about the midway point of a story. We've taken the hero out of their old normal routine. We've placed them in a new, strange place. We've given them a mentor that can help them learn about this new place, about their position in it, about the task that they have to complete. We've been tested, we've been given some choices, and then we have a larger test that either the hero fails or succeeds at. And often there will be a reversal. So we see that in Mulan, I think that the midway point here is that they have this battle, this initial battle, wherein she saves all of her colleagues. She saves everyone else in the battalion, but she does so in a way that reveals that she's a woman and has been hiding that from everyone else. Rama in the chat is saying Karate Kid is an example of an early defeat. That's exactly right. I don't know how many people have seen Karate Kid here, but that's a great example. Daniel LaRusso is training. He goes from just this guy who, moves to a new town. He doesn't have any friends. He's a very normal teenager. And then he enters into this world of karate and learning to fight. And he is actually an interesting character in that he has a lot of early defeats. He's bullied, he's beaten up. He starts learning karate because of that. And once he initially has his kind of first big challenge, he loses because he's not nearly as good. Even though he's got natural talent, he's got a great teacher, he's not nearly as good as the people he's going up against. And so he has an early defeat. And you'll sometimes see in a story that this midway point will be reversed at the end. You may have an early victory, which may portend that by the end of the hero may fail. And sometimes you would have someone at the middle point having their initial defeat, then going from the defeat and rising in skill until they're victorious at the end. And so it's about creating tension. Wal is saying Kung Fu Panda. That's another good one too, because Po, in the beginning, his normal world is selling noodles. And then he becomes a dragon warrior, which is a big change, is a call to adventure. He starts training, and he initially is very bad. He's deeply terrible at it, and he has failure after failure after failure. And by the midpoint, I think the midpoint is also wherein Tai Lung, the villain of the movie, has escaped already, and the other fighters, the Furious Five, confront him, and they're defeated by him completely. So Sometimes it's not necessarily about the main hero, him or herself, but it can be about showing how powerful the antagonist, how powerful the villain is by showing a defeat of the good guys. Some good examples here: First Blood with Sylvester Stallone, also same thing. He definitely suffers a serious defeat, and that causes him throughout the second half of the film to get a lot of very violent victories. And then Nora is also saying Moana, which is great. Moana is great because she has a sort of mixture of small and mid-level successes, where she fights these coconut monsters called Kakamora, that they get away, which is a success. It's an early success. And then she fights this crab monster called Tamatoa, and they win. They get away. It's a great example of it. But in her first kind of fight with the big villain of the movie, Tekka, they lose. They're beaten completely, and it's a very sad moment where we think we're not sure anymore if this person is going to succeed. So the great thing about this premature victory or defeat, this sort of initial early victory or defeat, is it can tell us, it places a huge dramatic choice for the character to keep going after a defeat. How do I keep going? What do I need to learn to be better? Or it can show us maybe too much pride or hubris in an early victory, which may lead to a downfall for our character. The Lion King is an interesting example because it doesn't exactly come in the midway point, but as Scar kills Mufasa, this is a huge change in the dynamic of the story, and it is a massive defeat for the good, for the good lions, and it also shifts our main hero into exile, and so that's a huge change. So the next part, the seventh part of it, of the hero's journey, is transformation. It comes after this initial victory or this initial defeat. What does defeat tell us? What does defeat teach us? If we are trying to go up against the big bad of the story and we fail, what can we learn from that failure? Did we use that failure to find a something about the villain that can be exploited? Is there a weakness? Did we learn anything about the villain? Did we only learn about ourselves? Did we learn that we need to be faster or stronger or smarter or have more resolve, to be more ethical? These are a lot of good questions that we have to ask ourselves, just as in real life, when we suffer a defeat or when we suffer a setback or something happens that we don't want to happen. It is in those moments that we have to ask those questions of ourselves to figure out how we grow and move beyond it, overcome it, and learn from it. So the transformation is mirrored by those early tests and choices. In the first part of the story, we've got new abilities. We can fly all of a sudden because we're Iron Man, or we're Mulan and we've become a really good warrior. And then in the second half of the movie, after that initial defeat or victory, we are tested again. We are given tests and choices, and hopefully who we have become or who the hero has become throughout that time will then help them make the right choices on the pathway toward ultimate victory. The eighth portion of the hero's journey is the lowest point for the hero. This can come during the transformation. It can come during the final battle with the villain. And when I say battle and villain, I'm also not necessarily just talking about fighting. I can talk about any story. You may have something like alcoholism as a villain. You may have a character who is addicted to something, or spends too much money, or is greedy, or has a vice of some sort, a sin of some kind. And you might have them have to overcome that. So that could be the villain of the story. It's not necessarily an external force. It's not necessarily another person. It's not necessarily a giant alien monster from a different planet. It doesn't have to be physical fighting either. It can be about the strength of will, and it can be about overcoming something dark in yourself or in the hero's personality in order to give victory. So I don't want you to think that when we talk about battling or talking about fighting, that is always physical, because in a lot of stories it's not. And a lot of dramas, in a lot of romantic comedies or romances, you may see that the main character has to overcome a flaw in order to get the person they love, to win over the heart of the person they love at the end. And so those are elements too that work. Hatem makes a good point, saying we should learn what our weaknesses and strengths, also our opponent's weaknesses and strengths. That can be very, very vital in the story for those initial defeats and those initial victories, and within the final fight, the final victory or the final defeat. The low point of the story is also called the dark night of the soul. And this is when we as the audience are not sure whether the hero will win or lose. For a lot of stories, Mulan, Star Wars, certainly, the Avengers, even in Friends, we have been led to believe that this group of people or this person is special, which is why we're paying attention to them and their story. We have been given a kind of insight into their natural abilities, their mentors helping to shape those abilities, and then we watch them grow to become a master of those abilities. And so it would be very boring if we got to the end and they just won very easily. That would be a very boring story. And at this point, I want to interject an idea, which is that when you look at the hero's journey, part of the cycle of it and part of the structure of the story is so that your story does not do this. It does not glide along easily with your hero winning tons of victories and then defeating the bad guy at the end. It also does not climb like this, wherein they learn tons and tons and tons, they learn a lot, and then they win, easy. It is to make the story do this, to go up and down, to face the hero with challenges that they can overcome, and to face the hero with challenges that they are not strong enough for yet, but they can learn from. So it is a matter of making sure that in the quest for getting what they want, it is not a smooth path. They have to learn, they have to grow, and there is a risk by the end of the story that they will lose. And I'm sure that all of you might have examples of stories wherein you were sure that the hero was going to win, and then they didn't. And it was probably a shock. And sometimes that makes the most interesting stories. Sesep says Game of Thrones, great example. Ton of examples within Game of Thrones of people who you just thought for sure were on their way, were gonna win. They did not, they did not. So I think that's a great example. And then I'm looking here, Rama also says, heroes almost always win. That makes projects that make them lose more interesting. That's a great point. Sometimes when you do something differently, it can make it very interesting. And Anne is actually suggesting A League of Their Own, which is a great example too, because sometimes, especially in sports movies, you might have a team who you've been watching the entire time grow and get better, and then they lose at the end, but they've gained something that's more important than winning the game. And so sometimes you have that as well, which is great. So the dark night of the soul, the lowest point, it is when we are not sure whether or not the hero is going to win or not. It is when they are at the very bottom, maybe physically, maybe emotionally, maybe mentally. You're not even sure if they can go on, and they have to muster some last part of themselves to go achieve victory. For romantic movies and romantic comedies, this is often a sequence where you have both of the romantic partners alone, and they will be staring off into the distance. And then they'll cut between one person staring off into the distance, looking very sad and thoughtful, and then the other person being alone and looking very sad and thoughtful. And it is when we just think there's no way that they can get together. This couple who we thought were in love and were going to be together and destined for each other, they're just you know, there's no way to apologize enough, and there's no way to change enough that it's gonna matter. And so we wait to see. And so, of course, what comes after the dark night of the soul? Victory or defeat. We either see that the hero loses in this final battle, or we see them win. We see them change to go from their lowest point in their life to gaining all of the things that they've learned throughout the rest of the story, and utilizing them in order to overcome or defeat an enemy. And that then is the end of the main action of the story. Everything from the beginning of the story has been leading to this moment, and they win, and the audience cheers, and it's great. Or it's been leading to this moment, and they lose, and it's tragic, and the audience is very sad. And then the 10th and final part of the hero's journey, that is a cycle, and it mirrors the other portion of it, is the new world. So at the beginning, the first is the normal world. It's the world we know, it's comfortable, we get all the rules. And then by the end, we have a new world. We have a hero inhabiting new talents. We have a world that's probably changed. And to look at this again, you have to consider that this is a vehicle for change. To take one person or a group of people or an environment, a town, a community, an entire planet in some movies, from a normal that we're used to complete change by the end of that. And I think that as a small exercise, you could think of your favorite books, your favorite movies, and just think about what is the character like at the very beginning and what is the character like at the very end. And chances are that they are going to be very, very different, because we have watched them grow, change, and then by the end of that, things will never be the same again. They can never go back to the old way because they are so profoundly changed. So that is the hero's journey. I have some homework for you, although you will never turn it into me because this is all the time we have. It's something to consider, something to think about, and that is to take the elements of the hero's journey, whether you've written them down within this class or if you look them up online. They're very easy to look up online as well. And I want you to apply them to something in your own life. So I want to use the example for anyone out there who is writing essays about for college entrance or something along those lines. This story structure can be very good in figuring out a story and a situation in your own life that changed you, who took you from the person you were, made you learn, grow. Maybe there's someone in your life that acted as a teacher or a mentor, gave you the skills and tools necessary to overcome an obstacle. And then at the end of that, you were triumphant or you failed and learned something. And then now you are the person that you are because of this change. For example, a small example for me, my normal life a couple of years ago was living in Washington, D.C. with my wife and my daughter. Our call to action was an assignment in Riyadh, and we accepted that call very willingly. And throughout the rest of the story, we had many mentors once we got here to Riyadh that showed us live life here, what to do, how to enjoy our time here in the city. We've been tested in multiple different ways. It's a different culture, it's different language, traffic is a little bit different. And so there are challenges along the way. We've learned from them, we grew from them. And maybe some of those challenges were the most difficult we've seen. COVID, this coronavirus, is obviously one of those massive, large challenges. And throughout COVID, there were definitely low moments that were really challenging, I think, for us and for everyone else. And now, as we emerge from that, we've learned a lot. And I am a different person than I was a few years ago before this assignment. I know that on a yearly basis, sometimes a monthly basis, we grow, we learn, we change, we become a different person along that way. Someone who knows more, someone who's more capable, someone who's faced challenges that we couldn't have imagined before then. So we all have this story to tell. We are all the main character in this story. And so my challenge for you, my homework for you, is to find something in your life. It can be the entire span of your life, or it can be a single moment where you went from a normal to who you are today, and utilize those steps of the hero's journey and really just plug them in as examples. You know, who was your mentor? What were your challenges? Did you overcome them? If not, what did you learn from them? Did you face off against an ultimate kind of change in your life and you were victorious? And now how are you different than you were at the beginning of that story? That's my homework for you. And now I will open it up to any questions that you might have. And while I'm not sure how you want to do that Q&A, if you want to moderate and look to the chat, or if you want to just have people open up with their audio. So while I turn it to
sure.
you.
Thank you very much, Scott. That's been awesome, really. Thank you. So our friends, if you would like to ask the question directly to Scott, just raise your hand and then we will open the mics for you, or if you would like to write it on the chat box. It's up to you. So this is the time that you can ask Scott. Please. Ibrahim, please go on.
Yes. Hello?
Oh, hi, Ibrahim.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Scott, for this. This was really interesting, really helpful. I have one question, which is, do you know about any rituals that could, help spark creativity? If you, if you're going through a phase where you feel that you don't have many ideas, many original ideas, like one of the great pieces of advice that I read in the book, The Right to Write by Julia Cameron, is something called morning pages. And she says that every morning, make sure that you write 3 pages about anything at all, even if you don't feel like it, something that happened to you or the weather or whatever it is. And I noticed that this did indeed have an effect on creativity. Do you have any of your own rituals that you think might be helpful?
Well, Ibrahim, thank you for the question. And you've actually answered your own question, because I'm a big fan of Julia Cameron's morning pages. For those of you who've never heard of it, he gave a really concise description of what it is. You can also look it up online. The idea is, I never make 3 pages. I can just never do it. But the idea is to, when you start, whatever your day is for writing, whatever your time is for writing, whether it's the full day, or whether you only have an hour, or you only have a half hour to write, you start with a kind of free-flowing stream of conscious, write whatever comes to mind and go as far as you can. I'm going to put it in the chat there. The name is Morning Pages. And the idea is just that, in the morning when you wake up, you would write immediately these things. You would, it's a way of getting the trash out of your head. It's a way of getting the garbage out of your head. Instead of thinking about, needing to pay this bill, or thinking about this deadline that you have, or your job, or something like that, you try and jot all that stuff down. It can be partially a journal. It can just be whatever your mind throws at it. But it is a way of getting all of those distractions out of your head and onto the page, so that then you can be receptive to the writing process. I use it. I've used it for years and years. And I think it is the single best thing that has helped me sparking creativity in order to do that. The other thing that I would say is reading. There's just no other substitute than reading as much as possible. If you want to be a writer, you've got to read and write. That's it. 2 things. Because as you read someone else's work, the more you read, the more you will recognize what works, what doesn't, what you like, what you don't like. And a lot of writers start in a kind of copying process. They will read and they'll find authors they love, and their earliest kind of writing will be copying a little bit of like the style of those writers. And the more and more you do that, the more you spend time on that, then all of a sudden your own style, your own voice starts to emerge. So reading is a huge part of that. The other thing you can do is, honestly, you can Google writing exercises. There's a book that I really love called The 3 a.m. Epiphany, and I will put it in here. The 3 a.m. Epiphany, which is a book of writing exercises, and they are to spark creativity, to give you a specific challenge and a specific word count in order to meet that challenge, and they can be really good. Sometimes we need someone else to say, hey, you should do this, try this, and it gives us an idea. So morning pages are huge as a good ritual, and reading as much as possible, and books like the 3 a.m. Epiphany or other writing exercise books can be really helpful, especially if you're just not feeling creative in the time. So I want to go back to, if I can scroll up correctly.
Yeah, so we have a question from Niveen. Would that process also apply for children's writing or only adults?
For children doing the writing, or for writing aimed at a child audience? Well, I'll answer it either way. I think that depending on the age of the child, that yes, like the process can work really well. I think that writing for children, you'll find that a lot of examples that use the hero's journey and that structure are aimed at young adults. A lot of young adult titles follow it exactly. And so it can be used by anyone and for any audience. Even the simplest, okay, so children's writing is in writing their own mini books, 100%, mia bil mia. Like it can be any, it can be very useful, especially for young children, young authors, really practicing and using this as a structure, because a kind of cool thing about Hero's Journey is that it is perfect as a beginner's structure, because it's its own blueprint for writing the story. It is already, the plot is there for you. You just have to plug in the details of your character and their circumstances into the blueprint. And so it can be great because it's perfect for beginners, but it's also used by the most advanced professionals in the world because it is so recognized and so comfortable and familiar. So absolutely, for children writing and also for stories aimed at children, it's a very useful structure.
So Niveen, your kids at school, they can use that too. Niveen, she's a teacher. So Muhammad Al-Hatimi, thank you so much for this informative session. My question is writing a talent or something we can learn?
Writing is something that anyone can learn. It is writing, storytelling, they are all skills like cooking. You have to eat in order to cook. And in writing, you have to read in order to write. But I know that even those who don't read, a lot of people watch movies, they watch television. Even people who don't read, don't watch television, don't watch movies. I don't know who those people are, but even they appreciate stories. Your neighbor telling you something funny that happened to them, or a fellow student explaining why they missed a test because they overslept and the excuse that they gave the teacher. These are all stories. We live by stories every single day. So absolutely, you can learn to be better at writing and storytelling. And that is something that I firmly believe, because I, on a daily and weekly basis, am trying to get better at doing this. And I think it's something that even if you have zero talent for naturally, if you practice, if you read a lot and you write a lot, you will get better and you can become great.
And we have two comments here. One from Reem, she said, sometimes our losses are reasons to be a hero. And Mr. Hatim also commented that widen your life and mind by traveling. Of course, Mr. Hatim, that was before COVID.
Yeah, and the funny thing is we kind of have to travel in books and in movies and TV now. We have to travel more than those things. But the cool thing about expanding your mind through travel is that the entire world is an invitation to adventure. The world out there is a call to action. You are sitting there in your life, your comfortable world that you know, but there are so many other worlds out there that just by existing invite you to go visit them and learn and grow. And so just the existence of these places outside of your own home is an invitation to action, to adventure, and to change.
Exactly. And there is a say in Arabic, خير جليس خير رفيق في Ibrahim, help me here. خير what? It means
في الزمان كتاب.
That's it, yeah. So it's the best friend, the best life friend is a book. Niveen also, she has a question. Would this be applicable to scientific writing?
I don't think so. The hero's journey is applicable to fiction. It's applicable to telling your own story or telling a joke at a party. Actually, that's kind of a funny thing. If you look at jokes, joke structure sometimes follows these hero's journey. You start with a person in a normal world and a concept, and something surprising happens and the person responds to it and changes, and then the situation changes. So even jokes have this kind of structure of simple change. So I don't think that they would be applicable to scientific writing. If I'm understanding, even writing historical documents, it can, but you also don't want, in something a bit more scholarly or something a bit, or in anything nonfiction, you don't want to be anchored down to this format, because real life doesn't usually look like this. It's never as clean as this structure. And so probably not. Really best to stick with fiction with this particular formula.
So Lamia, she's saying, thank you everyone for such a session. This is really helpful. Okay, thank you, Lamia. Glad that you had the chance to join us tonight. Mr. Hatim, scientific writing needs editing and knowledge abilities.
So I think maybe time for one more question, if we have one.
Okay, please, this is your last chance. So
yes, I have one question, if I may.
Please, Ibrahim.
I want to ask. I want to ask, how do you usually deal with criticism? Because I mean, writing, it's one of the most scrutinized and criticized professions, and of course, when you put something on paper, it feels really personal, and there's a vulnerability there that I think many people who don't write don't understand, don't appreciate. So when you receive criticism, how do you usually deal with it in a way that makes sense to you?
That is a fantastic question, and I think it's a perfect one to end on as well. The answer is many different ways, and it depends on the person giving the criticism and how they're delivering that criticism. I am at a point in my career where I have created a group of people that I trust enough to show the work to first, and second and third. And generally all of them understand how to give criticism. There are entire books on how to give criticism to people. It is not something simple. It is not something natural that comes to people. And it's something that is a learned skill, and most people do not have it. And so it's nice to find the people you trust the most. Sometimes it's not even your best friends. Sometimes your best friends do not give you good criticism on your work, either because they don't know how to criticize, they're too blunt, or they're too safe. They don't want to tell you that they think something negative about your work because they think it will hurt you, when in fact pointing out what might not work is a key to helping the work grow. I tend to have multiple responses to criticism depending on who's giving it usually, and whether the nature of the criticism is generally positive, generally negative. It can be really hard, you know, to receive criticism that's largely negative about something that you think is very good. And I think the key for me is just to listen openly and patiently, to accept what the person is telling me in that moment, and to do as much as I can to separate myself from my connection to the work, because the connection to the work is very personal usually. And for someone to say anything bad about it, it's hard. And so I tend to have to get into a mental space where I can try to treat this as maybe someone else's work, or as just this piece that I need to improve. And I think the first step for me is recognizing that when I give a first draft to someone, I accept that it will need to change. That's the first part, because accepting that it will need to change is the first step in receiving negative criticism, because you're more powerful in receiving it to say, I know it needs to change. I don't know how it needs to change. So now that you're giving me the negative criticism, you're showing me a possible way that I can change it, which is helpful and not hurtful. The other thing is, sometimes you have to listen with open ears to the person, thank them. Hopefully it sparks a conversation. That's always good. It kind of is a back and forth of like, well, what if we did this? Or what if I tried this? Do you think this would work? And then after you hang up the phone or the Zoom call, or after you part ways from being in person, I sometimes will scream into a pillow, or no, I'm just kidding. Sometimes you do have to recognize your emotions are high. Sometimes you have to recognize that you're feeling anxious or angry or sad or a little bit despairing, because this thing that you worked so hard on has now been ripped to shreds by someone. And then you have to give it time. You have to give it time. You have to give it space, and then approach it after that with more objective eyes to say, I know this needs to change. I've been given some answers as to how it might possibly change. And as you become more confident as a writer, you'll be able to say, this was a great point, or nope, I don't agree with that in any way, and I won't be changing it that way. This person is wrong. This is their opinion is valuable to me, but I don't agree with what they're suggesting for the story, and I'm going to keep this. Or, wow, that was a great point. I never would have seen it that way. I'm glad that they read it. I'm glad that they told me this negative part about it. This is what I need to work on. So now I'm going to focus on these things that need work. So those are good. It's tough. It's hard. It never gets easy. The process of professional publication is one of rejection after rejection after rejection. My average for a story is 8 rejections before acceptance. So you just live with the person on the other end saying, nope, not for us. And you move on. You learn to move beyond it. And it's, I wish I could say you get thicker skin, but not necessarily. It's still difficult. But hopefully you get to a space where you can receive that criticism in the right spirit, and to say, great, I am now going to take valuable information from it and choose the elements that I think are valuable, and then use them as tools then to reshape the story into the next thing it's going to become.
Thank you, Scott. Scott, if you may allow us for the last question from Rahaf, please. Thank you. Rahaf, please go on.
Good evening. Thank you so much for this informative session, Scott. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that in my own writing, I always love to start from the initial fail or success moment, and then to go back to the steps that led to that moment. And then from that step, from the success or fail, to go onward with the steps maybe that you talked about to the bigger success or even defeat. I'm probably inspired by this by real life events as a person in real life, I see myself in situations and moments where I don't necessarily think of how I got there, but when I'm in the moment, I start to think of the steps that to led to that specific moment, and then to start to seek solutions, or I don't know, start to think of ways to get of that, let's say, fail or defeat, or to even grow that success bigger and bigger. I just published my first novel in October, last October, and this is the way. Thank you. This is the way I used or I told my story in that novel. I started from the fail. The fail was like multiple failures, not just one. So it was very dramatic from the beginning. And then I talked about the steps that led to that moment specifically. This is how I like to tell stories. So if I have a question, I wanted to ask one. Is there any book, or I don't know, any let's say, are there resources on this journey, the one that I talked about, not the one with the order that you said, on which I can read more about this and educate myself on this type specifically from other people who were professional talking about this. Thank you.
Thank you,
Sure,
Rahad.
thank you. Thank you so much for the question, and Alif Mabruk on publishing. I think that's fantastic. And one quick note, I love your answer to this, because you know your own writing and you know your own process, and every writer has a different process, and finding that process is a matter of trial and error and experimentation. And you know, sometimes it actually changes. The thing that works and works and works for you as a writer, all of a sudden stops working, and you have to figure out a new process. And it's always about changing and experimenting. As far as books, there's a ton of resources online. Everyone has an opinion about this thing because it is so internationally popular. The main book that came out, I want to say 1932, is called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and it's by Joseph Campbell. And he's the first person to really formalize the structure, but it's a structure that's been used for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The book, Joseph Campbell's book, is a little bit dated. It's almost 100 years old at this point, but it's valuable, certainly, as a good basic primer for this structure. But honestly, if you Google hero's journey and structure, you will find so many resources, and it's hard to go wrong really reading as many as possible to see kind of what people's theories on it are. So with that said, there is one last question here from Mohammed saying, do I recommend any assisting writing tools which can be used to polish a proof for proofwriting? I can tell you what I use. I use Word, of course. I also use a program called Scrivener, and I can actually toss it in there in the chat. Scrivener is, I believe you have to pay for it, but it is an incredible organizational tool. It's a great distraction-free writing space, and it's very, very helpful. I also, people will find this very entertaining probably, but I use a program that's a website called For the Words. It's a number 4, the words, and it gamifies writing. And by that, I mean that it is its own game wherein you use writing and the amount of words that you write during a session to defeat enemies. And in the same way that you might have something on your phone where you're mindlessly looking at it and going from level 1 to 2 to 3 and beating all these levels, and you get that quick, you know, rush of happiness and achievement because you beat this level. This is applying those psychological aspects to writing. And so at the end of the day, instead of playing Candy Crush for 5 hours, I look down and I've actually beaten a bunch of monsters and gained a lot of achievements, and I've written 3,000 words. It's a really good way to make sure that you're putting those words on the page because, and this is the hard truth, and it's probably a good thing to end on, you don't become a writer without writing tons of words, hundreds of thousands, millions of words. You've got to just do it. And the old joke about writing is that everyone hates writing and everyone loves having written. They love being done with writing. But the only way to do it is push through. You just got to put words on the page and keep working at it. So before I toss it over, I do want to just say thank you to everyone who showed up today. Shukran Marra, and Ramadan Kareem to all of you. Thank you so much for spending some valuable time with me. Thanks to Anne, and thanks to Wael, and thanks to the Youth Outreach Program. I think this has been really great, and I've appreciated your attention and I appreciated all of your questions and comments and thoughts. So thank you. You've been a really, really great class.
Yes, I agree. And Scott, I think we might have to have you back in the future, even from DC, if you will agree to do a second session, maybe once you get settled in DC in the next few months. Yes, we had some people, I think they heard how popular you were and were dialing in a little bit late. But yeah, I as a, you know, I write every day in my job, and you know, it can be a slog, as you know, it's tough, but I still appreciate some of the words you said. I even took notes myself because we can always, it's always something you can improve. And I always appreciate hearing from other people and on their sort of strategy and skill sets and tips. So thank you so much. This was really great. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. Well, what do you have to say?
This has been awesome, really. And it will help me a lot on my writing. So I won't make a lot of edits when I send her a lot of stuff. Thank you very much, Scott. Really, this has been, so it's really brilliant. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for all our friends.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for staying with us for the whole night. I know you sleep early. And stay tuned for our next sessions. It will be on Mondays, every Monday, and the same time, but on Mondays. And very interesting topics are coming on. So just expect soon an email from us. Thank you very much and good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Good night.
Masalam.
Masalam.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hatem. Good night.
Salam.
Scott, thank you very much. Really, it's been very, very nice and informative session. Appreciate it so much. And we would love to have you again, of course, with us from DC if you have time and possibility. Thanks.
I'd be happy to. Thanks so much, Wael. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Have a great night.
You too. Good night.